Hi, how are you? I'm Mr. MUSO. Today we want to talk about Samoure Toure of the Mandinga Empire, the Napoleon of Sudan, Samoure Toure. The Napoleon of Sudan, Samoure Toure, we see that he was so important in the history of Africa in the sense that he was in a position of unifying the Mandinga Empire. He was in a position of establishing himself as a powerful leader. He managed to establish a formidable army. Why? It is because of shrewd diplomacy. It was because of the diplomacy that he used. So we want to discuss in detail about this guy who was known as Samoure Toure of the Mandinga Empire, the Napoleon of Sudan, Samoure Toure. So we discover that Samoure Toure, he was just an ordinary man, just like you and me. He was an ordinary man, a son of a peasant. His father, he was a peasant. He was used in the cultivation of crops. He was an ordinary man. But when he was young, he was determined that he wanted to change the outlook of his family. He wanted to change the outlook of his personality. So because of that now, when he grew up now, he joined the army. When he joined the army, now, we see him performing what extraordinary, and as a result of that now, he was recognized, and when he was recognized, Napoleon of Africa, Samoure Toure of Africa, he went on to be revived. He went on to become the army commander of the army. So because of that now, he was so significant in changing the outlook of the state, in changing the outlook of the Mandinga Empire. His zeal, his personality, his charisma, that on its own now led to the to the changing of outlook of the Mandinga Empire. So because of that now, we say that Samoure Toure was just like Napoleon Bonaparte of France. Why was he similar to Napoleon Bonaparte of France? It was because Napoleon was just an ordinary man, but when he was young, he had few snatches of sleep, a man of destiny, a man who was determined for success, a man who wanted to change the outlook of France. And because of that now, he joined the army. Napoleon of France, when he joined the army, he eventually was promoted and he became an army commander. When he became an army commander, he changed the outlook of the army. The army, the soldiers, they were encouraged, they were motivated. He introduced new methods of fighting, the guerrilla warfare, the scorched earth policy. So as a result of that now, we see the new outlook of France coming in terms of the army, and as a result of that now, he eventually was in a position of dominating France. This is similar to Mandinga Empire. It is similar to Samoure Toure of the Mandinga Empire. He was also filled with charisma. He was filled with that zeal, with that passion of changing the outlook of the Mandinga Empire. So when he was now the army commander, he changed the fighting methods, bringing in the scorched earth policy, bringing in the guerrilla warfare, and as a result of that now, eventually he became the leader of the Mandinga state. Just like Napoleon in France, he eventually became the new leader after he staged a coup d'etat and overthrew the directory. So that is what we have on this guy known as Samoure Toure, the Napoleon of Africa. He was so important. He played an important role in bringing about a new outlook of the Mandinga Empire. So we now want to move on and talk about what Samoure Toure did politically. Which were the political reforms did he bring when he became the new leader of the Mandinga Empire? What reforms were instituted? What reforms were brought in when he became the new leader of the Mandinga Empire? I will start by giving a general outlook of the political organization of the Mandinga Empire. It was like this. At the top, there was the Armami. Below, there was the provisional leaders. Below, there were the district leaders. Below, there were the chiefs. Below were the sofas, and below were the quad. This is how the political organization was organized. But before I explain about all this, I want to start by giving an overview of the political organization of the Mandinga Empire. So, when we are talking about the political organization of the Mandinga Empire, there are four important things that we are supposed to know. These four important things are: we are supposed to know about the role that was played by Armami. Samoure Toure, as a leader, he was known as the Armami. So a leader during that particular period of time, he was known as the Armami. Here in Zimbabwe, at Great Zimbabwe, he was known as the king. At the Mtapa State, the king. Roji State, the king. In the Ndebele State, Inkosi Yami. But here he was known as the Armami. So we are supposed to know about the role that was played by the Armami. Then we talk about the people who assisted the Armami, who assisted Samoure Toure. Then we'll talk about the centralization of the Mandinga Empire. The Armami established a centralized political system. So we talk about the centralization of the Mandinga Empire. Then we talk about the role of the army. What was the significance? What was the importance of the army? So these aspects, these four aspects, they outline the political organization of the Mandinga Empire. We are supposed to know about these four important aspects when we are talking about the political organization of the Mandinga Empire. Let me repeat them again. The role of the Armami, that is the leader, Samoure Toure, the people who assisted Samoure Toure, the centralization of the Mandinga Empire, and also the role of the army. So these four, they define the term political organization of the Mandinga Empire. Let's start with the first one. Let's start with the role of the Armami. What role did he play in the Mandinga Empire? So we see that Samoure Toure, he was so significant, he was so important in the Mandinga Empire in the sense that he was the religious leader. He presided over religious ceremonies that were conducted in the state. He led the people in the social gatherings that took place in the state. So he was the religious leader. He was also the army commander. He had to lead the people whenever they attacked, whenever wars took place. So he was the army commander. He was also responsible for all the trading activities that took place in the state. We are going to see that the Mandinga people, they traded with foreigners, and we see that all these trading activities, they were regulated, they were controlled by the Armami. The Armami, number 4, he was also responsible for solving disputes that occurred in the state. He was the chief judge. So whenever disputes took place in the state, we see that if those disputes were so difficult to solve, were not the district chiefs, the village chiefs were not in a position of solving these problems. They were given, they were supposed to be solved by the Armami. So he solved the disputes that took place in the state. The Armami was also responsible for allocating land. He allocated land in the state. So we see that the Armami played an important role in the Mandinga Empire. Samoure Toure played an important role in the Mandinga Empire. Let's move on and talk about the people who assisted the Arumami. Who assisted the Arumami? The Arumami was assisted by so many people. Like what I said, he was assisted by the provincial leaders. So we see that the Mandinga Empire was organized, or it was divided into provinces. So in those provinces now, there was a provincial leader. So the provincial leader gave advice to Arumami. He advised the Arumami. He assisted the Arumami on what was supposed to be done in the state. There were also district leaders. So below provincial leaders, there were districts. So district leaders, they also gave advice to the Arumami. They also helped the Arumami on what was supposed to take place in the state. Then these districts, also in those districts, there were also those people who were so important in the in these districts. These were called warships. The warships now, we see that they were responsible for recruiting the army. They were supposed to recruit an army that was supposed to be in place, that was supposed to fight in the event of a war taking place. So in these districts, there were warships. The warships were also very important. They worked hand in hand with the district leaders. Then we have got the chiefs. These chiefs were so important again in the sense that they were supposed to lead people in their different areas, or the different areas that were in the Mandinga Empire. Then there were also the Sofas. The Sofas were, Sofas, I'm talking about the army commander. He was known as the Sofa. The chief general was Arumami. Then the army commander were known as the Sofas. Not Sofas of sitting. Don't think about those. I'm talking about the army commanders. I'm talking about the army generals, not sofas for sitting. Yeah. Then we also talk about the quad. The quad here, we are talking about the judges. Those were supposed to see that justice was done. There was a fair system of justice. So these were the people who assisted Samoure Toure. They played a significant role in their political organization. So this clearly shows that the political organization of the Mandinga Empire, it was complex. And as it was complex now, we see that Samoure Toure was not a despot. He had to seek advice from these people on what was supposed to take place time and again. He had to sit down with these people and see how best the state was supposed to be governed. And by so doing now, it explains why the Mandinga Empire was so intact, why the Mandinga Empire was so stable. It was because of all these people who assisted Samoure Toure. So we are seeing that the way the Mandinga Empire was organized, it's almost similar to Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we've got the president. Below the president, we have got provincial leaders. Provincial leaders. Like in Zimbabwe, we've got Manica land, we've got Midlands, we've got Mashonaland West, we've got also Bulawayo province, Matabeleland North, Matabeleland South. We've got provincial leaders in those areas. So the situation was almost similar. We've got a provincial leader in Midlands, a provincial leader in Harare province, a provincial leader in Marsh Central, a provincial leader in Manica land. Then in those provinces, there were also districts. So we see that in each of these provinces, there are districts, like what we have in Zimbabwe. Then we have got chiefs in the rural areas. We are saying that those chiefs are supposed to, they were also they were very important in this political organization. So as a result of this now, we see that the political organization of the Mandinga Empire, it was well defined, it was well clarified, it was well defined. And as a result of that now, we see that the Arumami, he played an important role in this political organization. Let's move on and talk about the centralization of the state. Samoure Toure, in his political organization, he established himself as a centralized political leader. He was at the center, from the word centralization. We are talking about the center. He was at the center of everything that was taking place in the state. So it meant that he was always aware about developments that were taking place in his state, since he was at the center. He was the center of everything. So as a result of that now, he was always always aware about the developments, about the happenings that were taking place in the state. And as a result of that, now he was in a position of knowing everything that was taking place in his state. Just think about a central police station. The central police station is at the center of the town. Most central police stations, they are at the center. So the leader of the police in that province he will be at the a central police station. So it means that he is aware about what is taking place in his a province or in his area. Why? Because that is where the central police station is. So as a result of that, now he knows the developments, the happenings that will be taking place in his province, since he will be at the center. So the scenario was almost similar. He was at the center. So as a result of that, now he was always aware about the developments that transpired, about the developments that were taking place in his area. Then we also see that in his political organization, the army was so significant. He established a military state. He established a powerful army. Why did he establish a powerful army? Remember, he was a soldier. Around 1853 up to from 1853 up to 89, we see that Samoure Toure was so significant in the army, and it was through the army that he rose, eventually becoming an army commander, and eventually becoming the leader of the state. So he was a soldier, just like Napoleon Bonaparte in France, who was a soldier who later on became the leader of of France. So because of that, now we see that he established a powerful, a solid army. He appointed people in the army, especially the army generals, the army leaders. They were appointed on merit. So if you were hardworking, if you were determined for success, if you had that zeal that also Napoleon of Sudan had, if you had that zeal that Samoure Toure also had, it meant that you were uplifted, you were promoted on merit. Remember what Napoleon Bonaparte did. He introduced what was known as the Legion of Honor. That is also what is Napoleon of Sudan. That is also what Samoure Toure did, the Legion of Honor. He had to honor those who had to work hard. If you were a hard worker, if you could kill and also slaughter and kill so many people, you were honored. You are now given an important position in the assaid. So those who were hardworking, those who were so determined for success, like him, Samoure Toure, those who were determined for the goodness of the Mandinga Empire, the glory of the Mandinga Empire, they were uplifted. And when they were uplifted, now it meant that they were going to continue working hard. As they continued working hard, they were again uplifted. As they continued working hard, they were again uplifted. So that on its own, it brought competition. People were now always working hard. People were always now determined for the goodness of the Mandinga Empire. They were determined for the goodness of bringing the glory of the Mandinga Empire. And by so doing now, his state became a very, very powerful state as a result of this competition that was brought about because of the competition that was brought in the army, promoting people on merit. We also see that the soldiers, they were now taught modern ways of fighting. They were taught about the guerrilla warfare, like a guerrilla, then you take cover, you kill. And also they were taught about the scorched earth policy. You burn everything, and you see a person who be far away, that person there, then you attack. So he began to use new methods of fighting, such as the guerrilla warfare, the scorched earth policy, and that on its own now motivated his soldiers. We are talking about Samoure Toure in Sudan, in Africa, using guerrilla warfare, using scorched earth policy that was used by the Europeans in Europe. So by so doing now, it motivated the soldiers. It led the soldiers to fight wholeheartedly, so that they could they could know how these methods were operated. So as a result of that, now it explains why his army was formidable, why his army was so solid, and he had to abandon the traditional methods of fighting. For example, retreating, you going to the muddy areas. He had to abandon that one, and he had to use these modern technologies for fighting. And we also see that he had to also established gunsmith for productivity of guns. He manufactured his own guns, and as a result of that, now his soldiers were well equipped. And it is said that he had a standing army of about 90 to about 100,000 soldiers who were always ready for fighting. So that on its own, now having a big army standing ready for fighting, now explains why later on Britain, why later on France, the difficulties in defeating what Napoleon. Why? Because of the army which was so solid, because of the army which was so powerful. So as a result of that, now we see that his army now explains why Samoure Toure, he was in a position of staying in power for a long period of a time. So that is what we have on the political organization of the Mandinga Empire. So we are seeing how strong his political organization was organized. So that on its own explains why he was in a position of conquering neighboring tribes, conquering neighboring states, why he was so much popular during that particular period of time. Why? Because of the army that he established in the Mandinga Empire. Let's move on and talk about the economical organization of the Mandinga Empire. We are talking about Samoure Toure, the Napoleon of Sudan. You remember what Napoleon did when he became the new leader of France? You remember about industrialization, you remember about trade. That is also what Samoure Toure did when Napoleon Bonaparte in France came to power. Economical industrialization was started. France started to industrialize. Samoure Toure in Mandinga Empire also started to make gunsmith. He also started to manufacture different items that were used in the Mandinga Empire. So that on its own led the economy of the Mandinga Empire to revive. It led to the expansion of the Mandinga Empire. Trade was enhanced, trading with the Adula traders and trading with the foreigners. And that on its own now, it brought more wealth. It led the Mandinga Empire to be on a solid footing economically. So as a result of that, he became a darling of the people. Samoure Toure Chibaba Baba, Samoure Toure Mushe Mushe, Samoure Toure Bo Bo. Why? It is because of reviving the economy. So let's now talk about the economy in detail. He had to do what was done by Napoleon Bonaparte in France there. And we see that he was in a position of becoming Chibaba Baba because of the economy that he revived. Let's start by number one, the issue of tax collection. Taxes were collected. People moved in and around the area collecting taxes. How are you? How are you? We are here today. We want your tax. Give us your tax. How are you? How are you? How are you? I'm Johnson. Zuse. We are here. Our mandate is to collect tax. Collecting taxes. And as a result of that now, the items that were collected as taxes, they were used during the times of war. When the soldiers were invading a neighboring tribe, when the soldiers were fighting foreign troops, they ate items that were collected when taxes were collected by these people or by the soldiers. Then we also see that during the times of drought, when there was famine, the soldiers, they were fed using those items that they collected during the time of collecting taxes. So the payment of taxes was so important, and as a result of that now, the economy of the Mandinga state, it thrived because of the issue of collecting taxes. And the foreigners, those traders who used to come trading with the Mandinga people, they were taxed also. How are you? What's your name? I'm a white man. Okay, oh, thank you so much. We are so happy to associate with you. What did you bring today? I brought ABC. Then after that now, we see that they started to trade, but they were supposed to pay a tax for trade. So we see that taxes were so important in the Mandinga Empire. In relation to that now, let's talk about the issue of tribute. The people paid tribute to the Aumami, to Samoure Toure, to show respect or loyalty. It was paid using gold, it was paid using farm produce, and as a result of that now, we see that it was a way of honoring Samoure Toure. We honor you, we love you, we honor your name, we respect you, our leader, our Aumami. Thank you so much, thank you so much. So they to do that through paying a tribute, and the payment of tribute, it was compulsory. It was supposed to be paid by all the people in the Mandinga Empire, in the state. So the payment of tribute was significant. Let's move on and talk about the issue of trade. Trade was also another important economical activity that was done. Like what I have said earlier on, they traded with foreigners, they traded with the jeweler traders, and they were in a position of getting foreign items. Those items that they did not possess in the state, they were in a position of getting them through this trade that they conducted with the foreigners. The issue of a trade was so significant in their economy. These people, they were also involved in mining. They mined gold at the Bure gold fields, and as a result of that now, they were in a position of getting minerals that they were mining. So as a result of that now, those items that they mined, they had to use them to pay tribute to their money. They had to use them to trade with the foreigners. So the mining of gold, especially at Bure gold field, was so significant in their economy. So mining was an important activity that was done in the Mandinga Empire. These people, they were also involved in hunting. They hunted for meat, they also hunted for hides, and we see that in most cases, men were supposed to be, men were responsible for the hunting of animals. So hunting, it was done, but it is important to know that it was done to supplement their diet. It was done so that they could have more food, and more food, it meant stability in the state. These people, again, they were involved in agriculture. We are talking about cultivation of crops. They were also involved in the keeping of cattle. They were involved in the keeping of goats, sheep, and as a result of that now, they were in a position of having enough food through agriculture. They were in a position of having enough food through the animals or the livestock that they kept. So as a result of that now, they were having enough food as a result of agriculture that was practiced in the state. Remember Samoure Toure, he was a son of a peasant. The parents were peasants, they were farmers. So as a result of that now, it clearly showed the significance of farming in the Mandinga Empire. It was so significant, it was so important, the issue of agriculture. So basically, these are some of the economical activities that we can talk about that were done in the Mandinga Empire. Let's now move on and talk about religion. What happened in terms of religion in the Mandinga Empire? Let's start with number one, the issue of beliefs. These people, they believed in Islam. Islam, it brought them together. It was a unifying factor. Why? It is because several people, a number of people in the Mandinga Empire, they were Muslims. So as a result of that now, it solidified the state. It brought the people together. Why? It is because of this religion that brought them together. And this religion, again, it explains why Samoure Toure was able to last for a long period of time, to resist the French and also the British. Why? It was because of Islam, which unified them, which brought them together. People were taught about the Quran, people were taught about the teachings that were supposed to be followed for you to be a Muslim, and that on its own, following the Muslim teachings, brought these people together. So this belief now was so important in the Mandinga Empire. Let's move on and talk about the marriage alliances. Marriage alliances were again encouraged. People were encouraged to marry from other tribes. For example, you belong to this tribe, there is another tribe next door, you are allowed to marry from that tribe. There was a tribe far away from you, you could go there, look for Msikana, look for a girl, look for a beautiful girl, marry here, it was okay. So people were encouraged to marry beyond what our boundaries. Tribal, there were no tribal divisions. Everyone was brought together, and as a result of marrying from other tribes, tribes. As a result of marrying from other boundaries now, it solidified the Mandinga Empire. It brought people together, and as a result of that now, we see unity, we see stability, we see oneness, we see togetherness in the Mandinga Empire. Why? It is because people married beyond boundaries, and as a result of that now, we see Samoure Toure becoming a solid and a powerful leader in the Mandinga Empire because of these marriage alliances. And the marriage alliances were also important because they led to the expansion of the Mandinga Empire. The empire eventually became vast. It became so big. Why? It is because of the marriage alliances that were done within the Mandinga state. Then let's move on and talk also about the issue of career open to talent, just like what was done by Napoleon Bonaparte. Earlier on, I talked about the Legion of Honor, honoring those who did well. There was also career open to talent. People were encouraged to work hard, to pursue areas of talents, and also to distinguish themselves. According to J.B. Webster, we are told that they were encouraged to rise to the top. People were encouraged to rise to any position that they thought they were in a position of rising. So that on its own now, it pushed people now to go beyond their limits, to explore their visions, to explore their dreams, and to pursue their dreams. So we see that the career open to talent, again, it was so significant. People rising to their limits, so that to their limits, and by so doing now, we see the state are developing as a result of people identifying their purposes, identifying their dreams. So this again was an important social activity that was done in the Mandinga Empire. Let's now move on and talk about what Samoure Toure did with the foreigners. We've talked about the domestic policies, we've talked about the economical policies that were introduced by Napoleon of Africa, Samoure Toure. We have talked about the social activities that were done by Samoure Toure. So we now want to look on his foreign policy. Why did it take long for Samoure Toure to be defeated by the whites or the Europeans? So now let's look on his foreign policy. We are going to start, number one, with France's relations with Britain. His relations with Britain. How were the relations organized between France and Britain? So we see that Europeans, we are talking about European powers, they were so much interested in Africa, especially around the mid-1880s. They were so much interested in Africa. Why? I think you remember from your European history that in 1870, France and Germany, they were involved in a war which was known as the Franco-Prussian War. And in that war, France was defeated. As she was defeated now, she started to look for colonies in Africa. She was embarrassed on the Franco-Prussian War. So in order to redeem that prestige that she lost on the Franco-Prussian War, she started to occupy colonies in Africa. So she came and started occupying colonies in Africa. So when that took place now, that disturbed the balance of power. It destabilized the balance of power, and the other countries thought that they were being left behind. They started to follow what France was doing, and when they started to follow what France was doing, it led to the scramble for Africa. So that is why we are saying that in the mid-1880s, European powers, they had now so much interest in Africa. Why? It is because of colonies that were in Africa. They wanted these colonies so that they could get economical gains from these colonies. But however, they ended up clashing amongst themselves over colonies in Africa. So we see that France had interest in the Mandinga Empire. France wanted so much to be in control. They wanted so much to dominate Samoure Toure as the empire. And as a result of this now, Samoure Toure was very cautious. He had to use shrewd diplomacy in order to protect himself against France. And at the same time, we see that he was supposed to protect himself against Britain. So as a result of this now, Samoure Toure, he was supposed to use shrewd diplomacy, that is playing off with Britain and also playing off with France, so that he could maintain, or he could keep his empire for a long period of time. So we haven't said this now, we see that eventually the European powers, they met in 1884-85 on the Berlin Berlin Conference, where Africa was divided amongst themselves. Africa was shared amongst the European power. African colonies, they became spheres of influence of the European powers. So when they became spheres of influence of the European powers now, it meant that the Europeans were now in total control of African colonies. So we are not worried about the scramble. We are still on Samoure Toure. So we are seeing that because of this now, Samoure Toure, since his area it was given to the European powers on the Berlin Conference, he was supposed to protect his state from total occupation, from effective occupation from these European powers. What did he do? So we are going to see that he signed the Treaty of Bisandugu in 1886. When he signed this Treaty of Bisandugu, it was a way of protecting, it was a way of trying to make sure that his kingdom, possibly it was going to last for a reasonable period of a time. So in this Treaty of Bisandugu that he signed, we see that he gave his area that was in the northern side along the river Niger. So he gave away his area in the northern side alongside the river Niger on the Treaty of Bisandugu that he had to sign with these Europeans. Then having said this now, we also see that he wanted also to take his time to defeat the Tokolo, because during this particular period of time he was fighting with the Tokolo people, the Tokolo Empire. So it was a way of trying also to buy his time so that he could fight the Tokolo Empire. So doing now, he invest much of his time in protecting, in safeguarding his area, and he had to sign this treaty also to keep Britain out of the Mandinga Empire, since Britain was the country that was given to it was the country that he had been given his empire or his state on the Berlin Conference of 1884-85. So we see that he tried to do the best to protect his kingdom. He tried to do the best so that his kingdom was safeguarded by signing with this Treaty of Bisandugu with France. But however, this shrewd diplomacy, it did not work. Trying to protect himself against the Tokolo people, trying to protect himself against Britain, trying also to be in good books with France so that he could shelve Britain away from his empire. That was what he did. But unfortunately, this shrewd diplomacy, it was not all that successful. But he tried to buy time by signing this Treaty of Bisandugu with France. So having said this now, let's now discuss in detail why it took several years for Mandinga Empire, why it took so long for Samoure Toure to resist European imperialism. It had to take several years. Samoure Toure resisting European imperialism. It had to take so many years resisting to be occupied by the Europeans. There are so many reasons that explains why it had to take so many years, why it had to take several years to resist European imperialism. So that is what we now want to talk about. Number one, it was possible for Samoure to rule his kingdom for a long period of time, to be in total control of his kingdom for a long period of time. This was because of several reasons. Number one, it was because of the methods of fighting that he used. He used modern technologies for fighting. He used the guerrilla warfare. He used the scorched earth policy. So that on its own explains why it had to take so long for the foreign powers to defeat the Napoleon of Africa, the Napoleon of Sudan, Samoure Toure. Why? It was because of these modern technologies. I explained about the guerrilla warfare. You guerrilla, then you take cover, then you bullet, and you kill. Then scorched earth policy, scorched earth you burn. Then you see an enemy from afar. So you have to use those modern technologies for fighting, modern methods for fighting, similarly to what was done by the whites, the Europeans. They used the scorched earth policy and the guerrilla warfare, and as a result of that, now it explains why his kingdom it had to last for a reasonable period of time. His army also used guns. His army also used horses. Samoure Toure. Enough, Samoure Toure, I give you enough. Using guns, using horses, with the horses, African. Samoure Toure, thank you. You were so powerful. You were so determined for success. Like what I said when I started this topic now, using modern technologies. horses, using guns for fighting. So that on its own now, it explains why his kingdom, why his state was in a position of lasting for a long period of time. Then we also see that number 2, Samoure Toure, he also organized his army into battalions. His army was organized into 3 important battalions. Number 1, there was a battalion that was responsible for conquering new territories. This battalion, it was specifically responsible for conquering new territories. Number 2, there was a battalion that was there for harassing the French people, harassing them, harassing the French people, specifically for that. So there was a battalion for what? For harassing the French people. Number 3, since I said that France was interested in the Mandinga Empire, so he wanted to frustrate them, and the group that he had to recruit was specifically responsible for harassing the French soldiers. And they were get why? Because the French were using guns and horses. Samoure Toure was using guns and horses. So we see that he was a statesman par excellence. Then we also see that there was also a battalion that was responsible for conquering people, for relocating, people who were conquered. Those people who were conquered, they fought different states, they fought neighboring tribes, they fought different tribes. Those people, when they were defeated, they were supposed to be relocated, and there was a battalion specifically for relocating given areas to these people who were conquered, people who were subdued. So there was a battalion specifically responsible for for that. So it explains why his army, it explains why it had to take long for him to be defeated by the whites. Why? It was because of using diplomatic ways in the army, so that the army was in a position of defending itself against the French who were interested in his area. Then, number 3, let's talk about the issue of shrewd diplomacy. He used also shrewd diplomacy. Playing off Britain against France. Playing off Britain. Britain was given the mandate to control the Mandinga Empire on the Berlin Conference of 1884-85. But now we see that he had to sign the Treaty of Bisandugu in 1886. And signing this Treaty of Bisandugu now, it meant that Britain was going to be frustrated. And being frustrated now, it meant that Britain was not going to attack Mandinga Empire. It was not going to attack Samoure Toure, because they knew that Samoure Toure was in good books with the French people. But at the same time, he was trading with the British people. So that shrewd diplomacy, he's trading with the British people, and he had signed the Treaty of Bisandugu with France. He's in good books with France, but Britain was given the mandate to control the Mandinga Empire. So that shrewd diplomacy now, it explains why the Mandinga Empire lasted for a long period of time. He was doing that so that he could buy time. So as a result of that now, it explains why his empire was in a position of lasting for a reasonable period of time. Number 4, let's talk about the army. Samoure Toure, it is said that he had an army of about 90 to 100,000 soldiers. 90 to 100,000 soldiers, a big army. His army was so big. And we had to talk about the leader of the army. The armies were recruited from districts. The district chief who was responsible for recruiting the army. And it is said that the army eventually was so big. It was a big army. And having such a big army now, it was difficult to defeat him. Why? Because the army, it was always there. 90 to 100,000, it's a big army. And it is said that about 10 to 20,000 soldiers, they were armed at all the times. 10 to 20,000 soldiers, they were always armed, always armed. So it was difficult for the Europeans to defeat Samoure Toure. Why? Because his soldiers, a number of them were always armed. They were prepared for this war. They were well trained, the soldiers. They were well fed. They were well educated. They were well equipped. So as a result of that now, it became difficult for the French and also the British to defeat Napoleon. But eventually he was defeated, but it had to take a long period of time before they defeated the Napoleon of Africa, the Napoleon of Sudan, Samoure Toure. Then we also see that there was also loyalty in the army. The army respected Samoure Toure. Religion brought them together. The army respected Napoleon of Africa. They respected Samoure Toure as a religious leader. So he brought them together through Islam. The teachings of the teaching of Quran led the soldiers to regard Samoure Toure as their religious leader, as their leader. So that on its own now, it led Samoure Toure to get enough loyalty from these soldiers. So as a result of that now, explaining why his state was in a position also of lasting for a long period of time. Then we also see that the soldiers, they were well trained, they were well equipped, like what I've already said, and he had also his gunsmith, which was there making guns. His gunsmith also repaired guns. So as a result of that now, it was also difficult for the Europeans to defeat the Napoleon of Africa. Why? Because they had gunsmiths that manufactured guns, gunsmiths that also repaired guns, and as a result of that now, it meant that they had enough ammunition to protect themselves against enemies. So as a result of that now, it explains why it had to take a long period of time before Napoleon of Africa, Napoleon of Sudan was defeated. Then we also see that he abolished the defense of muddy warfare. Muddy warfare, if they were attacked, retreating to the muddy areas. And that on its own now, it assisted him in the sense that he was in a position of adopting to modern technologies. Adopting to modern technology is in the sense that he had to accept, he had to embrace modern methods of fighting. He had to copy modern methods of fighting from the Europeans. And as a result of that now, he was in a position of protecting his empire, his state also for a long period of time. He abandoned the traditional ways of fighting and yet adopt modern methods of fighting. Samoure Toure also used spies. They could spy. They were sent to spy, and as a result of that now, he was always aware about what the enemy was doing, what those countries, what those states wanted to do in the Mandinga Empire. Why? It is because these spies now always alerted him about what other people, other states, other countries were planning against the Mandinga Empire. So that on its own explains why his state was in a position of lasting for a long period of time. This explains why Samoure Toure was in a position of lasting for a long period of time. It took long for Britain. It took long for Britain and also France to defeat him because of these methods of fighting that he introduced. But unfortunately, eventually he was defeated. Why was he eventually defeated? It was because people were now tired of wars, like what took place to Napoleon in France. People were tired of continuous wars. Some of his generals were dead. We see that. So as a result of that now, he was left with young generals. They were not as effective, they were not as efficient as those old generals. So because of that now, we see that he was eventually defeated. The vastness of his empire, the empire was now too big. So because of that now, we see that it led to divisions. Divisions started to occur in his state, in his empire, and as a result of that now, it led to the downfall of the state. There was now disunity within the state, and as a result of that now, it affected him, eventually leading to the collapse of the Mandinga Empire. But although the state collapsed, although the state eventually had to demise, there are so many positive aspects that we can talk about, that we can identify and say that really Samoure Toure was a champion. He was a leader par excellence. Why? It was because of the way he organized his people, the way he organized his empire, the way he organized his state was above it was above board. He made sure that he was supposed to establish a well-grilled, a solid, a formidable state, and that is exactly what he did. So that is what we have on Samoure Toure. Thank you so much. I'm Mr. MUSO. Cheers.